Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Year 9, wherever and indeed whenever you're listening to this. This is your revision podcast for your exams that are happening at a time of recording in about 3 weeks' time. So, with some of you, we are still going over the content. So I've made this lesson as easy as possible and we'll keep it quite quick. In your exam, you need to revise 2 different topics, okay? Now, you need to revise tourism. That's going to be the bulk of your exam, and you need to revise also globalization, which we are currently studying right now. Okay, so for tourism, it's important that you know what a tourist is. It's someone who visits somewhere for leisure purposes, on holiday for a temporary amount of time. For example, I am not a tourist in Northern Cyprus because I'm living here, I am working here. A tourist is someone who only visits temporarily. In terms of holiday tourism, what do you need? You need passport documents, you need to have you need to have accommodation, you need to have food, you need to have transport sorted. You can't go on holiday without those things. But there's this idea about tourism being, damaging for the environment, but also you could have something called sustainable tourism. So what makes tourism sustainable? What do you have to do to make it sustainable tourism? Well, that's doing things like having no impact on footpaths and following certain routes. Maybe it's not littering. Maybe in terms of keeping tourism sustainable, it's having transport that doesn't affect an area, using local hotels, using local establishments, using local taxi drivers rather than big companies. That's quite important. So that's sustainable tourism. Ecotourism is where you actively do go out to an area to help manage, protect, save the environment. So that could be, for example, when people go to the rainforest to try and protect animals and conserve certain parts of the rainforest, like the tribes and stuff. That is ecotourism, and this is good. This is beneficial because it protects animals, protects trees. It means you're having little to no impact on the environment yourself, and you still get to experience, somewhere else, different culture, different people, really. So looking at tourism, looking at sustainable tourism, looking at ecotourism, it's just important to revise, and this is worth plenty of marks in the exam, so please do listen. It's very important to revise how this is different for different people. So if you're a tourist, obviously the words sustainable and ecotourism mean something different to you than it would to local businesses. If you're a local business owner, you'll see tourism very differently to someone who's a tourist, because tourist, it's your money you're spending. Local business it's their money you're getting, and tourism you often rely on for your business to succeed. Then don't forget, what about the government? So in Peru, half of the money the government has is from tourism. So that's really important, and it's going to be different from their opinion, how much they charge local businesses. What about local people? People who live in these areas. Yes, tourism will provide them jobs, but tourism can damage their economy, damage their lives. That they'll have busier traffic, they'll have a worse environment because of tourism. So it's very important to consider how this affects different people, whether it be local hotel, local restaurant owners, the governments, local people, and the tourists themselves. And then it's a case of revising globalization. Okay, so what is globalization? It's the increase in interconnectedness between countries due to ultimately the improvements in transport and technology. So I have taught you about this already at the time of recording, but about, the 2 T's of transport and tech. Tech improves, it means I can call somebody the other side of the world. Transport improvements have meant I can get anywhere in the world in a matter of maybe hours, if not a day or 2 at maximum. So that's improved trade, that's improved income, that's improved money for these areas. You've started to see things like TNCs. So the best example in Northern Cyprus is Burger King. So a TNC is a transnational corporation or transnational company. It's basically a business that operates in more than one country. There's a Burger King in the United States, there's a Burger King in the UK, there's a Burger King in Northern Cyprus. This shows me it's a TNC. But there's loads. Think about Starbucks all over the world, McDonald's all over the world, Pizza Hut, Nike, Amazon. All those things operate in more than one country, therefore they're a TNC. Now, there's one governing body to oversee trade to make sure it's fair for everybody, the World Trade Organization, WTO. The World Trade Organization basically manages how much money countries can charge each other to make sure it's fair for poor and rich countries alike. So it's making sure there's equality, making sure no country gets exploited. And then it's just a case of evaluating globalization. That's literally it. So what are the good and what are the bad? So globalization has made countries more money. Globalization has meant you have more access to foods and items from other countries. However, in terms of disadvantages, it's definitely bad for the environment. All these planes and trains and cars that have increased means more people travel, which means worse effect on the environment. Also, TNCs are great if you fancy a McDonald's, but don't forget about that little cafe. So small businesses often get outpriced by the big chains that can afford to charge less. So local businesses suffer. Yes, it provides jobs for people, but maybe these big companies are making people lose their jobs. If there's one big coach company operating, then little taxi drivers won't have their income. So yeah, there's this inequality growing. There's this, countries have got richer, the rich countries got richer, and the poor have got poorer. Often they get exploited for cheap materials and cheap labour. Factories for H&M and Primark and other companies like that used to be in London, used to be in America, and now they're in parts of Asia where they charge $1 a day for some people to work there, which is, people having to be in absolute poverty. And then just make sure, how you understand about how trading works. So, over the oceans mainly, why do people use boats? Well, basically they use boats because you can fit more on them. You don't really trade via the sky unless you really have to. It is much quicker to trade in a plane, but on a boat it can take much longer, but you can get much more stuff on there, so it's much more efficient. People live on the coastlines for this reason. Think about the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Carina, or being on a harbour side or a seafront, so they can trade with these people and with these countries and with these companies. And it's not equal everywhere. There's some areas like sub-Saharan Africa it's very hard to get into. There's not much in terms of materials there for farming, for example, but there's a lot of trade from the richest countries. It can be not just goods, it can be information, it can be ideas, it can be tech, it can be finance. Money can be transferred immediately. So there's often big amounts of trade coming from basically the global superpowers, like the United States to the UK to France, France to Turkey to China to India to Japan, and then Japan back to the United States. There is often more trade there because ultimately that's where the money is. And China sells its items when it makes millions and millions of items every day. It's not the countries like in Africa and South America that are buying them. It's countries in Europe and the North American continent. And ultimately there's a reason for that, and that's because of money. That's because of access to money. That's because of availability of funds to find these and afford these items. And that will be in your exam. So make sure you revise about how global trade can be different in different areas. Ultimately, that's it. Nice and short, nice and sweet. Any questions you have, hit the comments or come and ask me, and I'll be happy to help. See you soon.